The silence of the desolate planet was suffocating. It wasn't the kind of silence that was simply a lack of sound, but rather an absence of life, of movement, of anything that might indicate existence beyond the vast stretch of empty sand and rocky terrain. Lyra Carson felt it in her bones, that haunting stillness as she watched her spacecraft slowly descend into the jagged expanse below. The red sky was unnaturally thick, a color that reminded her of dried blood, streaked with occasional flashes of lightning. It flickered erratically, like a dying signal, trying desperately to stay alive. The atmosphere was toxic, filled with suspended dust and radiation, enough to make most species with even a shred of common sense turn away. But Lyra wasn't most species. She had traveled across light years, from the bustling cities of Earth to the edge of the unknown, driven by an obsession she couldn't quite define. Her mission, her reason for being here on the barren world of Erix-4 was not simply for exploration. No, she was here for something much more. The lost city of Valmore. Lyra gripped the armrests of her pilot's chair as the ship shook slightly upon impact with the planet's surface. Her heart skipped a beat, the sense of anticipation almost too much to bear. The landing was smooth enough, but the knowledge of what lay outside the cabin sent an electric thrill through her. She was about to step into the unknown. The faint hum of the engines faded as the ship powered down, leaving only the harsh hum of her own breath and the occasional creak of metal. Lyra's mind flashed to the research, the countless years of theories and the fragments of alien text she had managed to decipher. Valmore was said to be an ancient civilization, long extinguished, but with secrets so powerful they could change the very fabric of reality. There had been no trace of life here for millennia, but according to the coordinates she'd uncovered, she had found it. The ruins were buried beneath layers of sand and time, but they were real. She could feel it in her gut. She took a moment to breathe deeply, adjusting her helmet and checking her equipment once again. The suit would protect her from the planet's harsh environment, but it couldn't shield her from what she might find within the city itself, or who she might encounter. Lyra knew she couldn't afford to make a mistake here. There were no second chances. With a swift movement, she opened the hatch, and the rush of stale air greeted her, dusty, sharp, like something long forgotten. The ground beneath her boots was solid, cold rock, interspersed with patches of fine sand that clung to the air, swirling like ghostly whispers. The ship had landed in a relatively flat area, but in the distance, the skeletal outlines of Valmore rose against the red sky. She could make out towering spires, their once grand design now shattered and weathered, the stone crumbling under the weight of time. The city's grandeur was still evident, but only in faint, broken fragments. As Lyra stepped forward, the surface crunched beneath her boots. Her boots left deep imprints in the sand, and she felt the eeriness of this world settle around her like a cloak. It was almost as if the planet itself was waiting for something, waiting for her. The sense of anticipation, of discovery, was intoxicating. The landscape before her felt ancient, its mysteries pulsing just beneath the surface. It was as if everything here had been waiting for someone to come and unlock its secrets, waiting for Lyra to reach out and connect the scattered pieces of the puzzle that no one else had dared attempt. After what felt like hours of navigating through the debris, Lyra reached the entrance of Valmore. Massive double doors lay partially open, just wide enough for her to slip through. The architecture was unlike anything she had ever seen. Smooth, curved lines that seemed almost organic, reminiscent of designs she had read about in ancient Earth texts but never before seen in person. The doors, made of an alien metal, shimmered faintly in the dim light of the planet's weak sun. Inside, the city was vast and unyielding. The walls of Valmore seemed to breathe. Every corner was an echo of a lost time, and the air was thick with a strange energy. Lyra activated her holographic scanner, mapping the layout of the city as she moved. The city's structure was intricately designed, with chambers, hallways, and massive, towering walls etched with alien symbols. And then she saw it. At the heart of the city stood what looked like an enormous circular chamber. The room was bathed in an eerie blue glow, and at the center, hovering in midair, was a massive stone slab, inscribed with symbols Lyra had seen only once before in a text that had eluded all modern scientists. It was ancient, older than anything humanity had ever uncovered, and yet it pulsed with life, as if alive, breathing with some otherworldly rhythm. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had found it. The key to everything. She walked closer, trembling slightly as her gloved hand brushed the surface of the slab. Her scanner buzzed erratically, detecting an energy field that was unlike anything she had ever encountered. It was both organic and mechanical, a fusion of ancient technology and something far more advanced. But before she could analyze the findings, the air around her seemed to shimmer, distorting, like a ripple in space itself. The stone slab began to hum softly, and Lyra froze, her body tensing as the air around her thickened. Then, a voice, a whisper, cold, echoing in her mind. "Why are you here, human?" Lyra's heart raced. She spun around, looking for the source, but there was nothing. Nothing except the remnants of an ancient city that had long since been abandoned. "Who's there?" Lyra called, her voice unwavering despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Show yourself." The air in front of her shimmered again, this time more distinctly. And as the distortion cleared, a figure stepped into view. It was tall, impossibly tall, and cloaked in shadows. Its body was a silhouette against the pale glow of the chamber, but the faint gleam of its eyes pierced through the darkness. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. This figure was unlike anything she had ever seen, a creature that stood at least a foot taller than the average human, its limbs long and graceful, its form impossibly thin. A shimmering metallic sheen covered its skin, faint blue light pulsing beneath like veins of light running through its alien body. Its face was a blur, hidden beneath a cowl that seemed to shift in and out of focus. It stepped forward, and the floor beneath Lyra seemed to hum in response. The figure moved like liquid, its presence filling the room with an overwhelming energy. It was both beautiful and terrifying, an enigma from a forgotten world. You're not human." Lyra's voice was a whisper now, almost as if she feared speaking too loudly would shatter the moment. The figure tilted its head slightly, as though considering her words. It spoke again, its voice a deep, reverberating sound that seemed to come from the very core of the planet itself. "No, I am not human, but you are trespassing, human." Lyra stood her ground, even as her pulse quickened. She knew the legends, the warnings about ancient beings that still roamed these worlds, guardians of lost knowledge. But she also knew what was at stake. The knowledge she had come to find could change everything. Humanity's future, its understanding of the universe, and if this being was indeed a guardian, then it had answers. "I seek the knowledge of Valmar," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I've come to learn what happened to your people." The figure studied her, its glowing eyes narrowing. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the room grew heavy, like a storm about to break. Then the figure's lips moved again, though there was no malice in its tone. "Knowledge is not given freely. It must be earned," it said. "You will face a trial, a test. Only those who are worthy may access the secrets you seek." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. "A trial?" she asked, voice quivering despite herself. "What kind of trial?" The figure's lips curled into something like a smile, though it lacked warmth. "The trial of the forgotten. You must prove your worth." A cold chill spread through Lyra's chest, but she steeled herself. She had come too far to turn back now. "And if I fail?" Then you will never know what you seek, the figure answered simply, its gaze piercing through her. If you fail, the secrets of Valmore will remain lost to you forever. Lyra took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would define everything. She had come here for knowledge, and now, standing face to face with something far older than her species, she could feel the weight of that knowledge pressing down on her. Whatever the trial was, she had no choice but to face it. "I accept," Lyra said, her voice steady, her eyes fixed on the glowing figure before her. And as she spoke the words, the room seemed to shift again, as though reality itself was bending in response to her decision. The energy in the air grew thicker, pulsing with ancient power. The trial had begun. To be continued. The air around Lyra grew thicker, pulsating with an ancient energy, as though the very fabric of the world was shifting in response to the figure's presence. The shimmering figure before her, with its glowing eyes and otherworldly aura, had already spoken of the trial, but Lyra had no idea what to expect. What did it mean to be worthy in this alien world? What was the cost of uncovering the city's secrets? Her heartbeat quickened as the figure gestured for her to follow, and she took a steadying breath, pushing aside the wave of fear that tried to overtake her. This was why she had come. This was her moment, her discovery. The figure did not speak further as it turned and glided toward the far side of the chamber. Lyra followed cautiously, her footsteps soft against the cool stone beneath her boot. The walls of the circular chamber pulsed with an ethereal glow, casting eerie shadows that seemed to shift with each step she took. The symbols etched into the walls glimmered as if alive, their alien shapes twisting and turning in the faint light. It was as if the room itself were breathing, alive with the consciousness of a long-dead civilization. As Lyra reached the center of the room, the figure stopped before an enormous stone slab that hovered inches above the ground. The slab was covered in intricate patterns, unlike anything Lyra had seen before. Her eyes narrowed, instinctively trying to decipher the alien markings. "You have entered the heart of Valmore," the figure said, its voice resonating like a deep hum that reverberated through the chamber. "This is the place of knowledge. But knowledge is not free. You must prove yourself before the city's secrets can be unlocked. You must face your deepest fears, and only then will you be worthy." Lyra's stomach twisted into knots. "And if I fail?" The figure's eyes narrowed, glowing brighter in the dim room. "Failure is not an option. The trial will not be kind to those who are not ready." Its voice grew even deeper, as if the words were being spoken by the planet itself, not just the figure. "But failure will not be the end. It will simply be the end of your journey here." A cold shiver ran down her spine, but she stood firm, unwilling to back down. This was her one chance, and she knew it. She had come too far to be intimidated by vague threats. "I'm ready." The figure tilted its head slightly, its features unreadable. Then, without another word, it raised one long, spindly arm toward the stone slab. The alien symbols etched into its surface began to glow with an eerie, pulsing light, and the air hummed with an energy that was so thick Lyra could almost feel it pressing against her skin. The stone began to move, slowly at first, then more rapidly, rotating in place until the symbols formed a circle around the chamber. The chamber around Lyra seemed to warp and distort. The edges of her vision flickered, the walls shifting as if the room itself was alive. A sound like a distant thunderclap echoed through the stone, reverberating off the walls, growing louder and louder until it was almost unbearable. And then, with a sudden, deafening silence, everything stopped. Lyra felt her legs go weak. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as the hum of the chamber faded into an eerie quiet. The figure spoke again, its voice softer now, almost contemplative. "You are now in the presence of the trial of the forgotten. It will bring you face to face with your greatest fear, the fear that lies deep within you, the one you have buried in the darkest recesses of your soul. Only by confronting it will you earn the right to claim the knowledge of Valmore." Lyra clenched her fists, trying to steady herself. "What do I need to do?" "Simply remain here. The trial will come to you. There is no escaping it." The figure stepped back, vanishing into the shadows, leaving Lyra standing alone at the center of the chamber. Her breath was shallow now, her pulse thudding in her ears. She had trained for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the weight of the unknown that pressed down on her chest. A flicker of movement in the corner of her eye caught her attention. She whipped her head around, but the chamber remained empty. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a trick, a cruel illusion. But then, the floor beneath her feet trembled. The air grew heavy again, thick with the same oppressive energy that had filled the room earlier. Lyra took a step back, feeling her breath catch in her throat. She was alone, and yet she wasn't. The lights in the chamber flickered again, and Lyra's surroundings began to shift. The walls blurred as though the very space around her was warping. The edges of her vision were filled with flashes of images, none of which she could focus on. It felt like being caught in a dream, the world stretching and pulling away at the same time. Suddenly the lights dimmed entirely, and the room was plunged into darkness. Panic seized Lyra as the silence grew deafening, a low hum vibrating through her entire body. "Lyra!" The voice came from behind her, deep, familiar, and yet unmistakably alien. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat as she stared into the darkness, but there was no one there. "Lyra!" the voice called again, this time louder, more insistent. Her heart hammered in her chest as the world around her began to solidify once more. She was standing in what appeared to be a room, but not the same chamber where she had just been. This was different. The walls were made of smooth, pale stone that curved upward into a high, vaulted ceiling. Strange, glowing symbols pulsed from the walls, and in the center of the room stood a figure. Her figure. Lyra gasped, taking a step back as she saw herself standing before her. Her reflection, no, it wasn't a reflection, was standing there, calm, composed, with eyes that were cold and distant. But Lyra's reflection wasn't smiling. Instead, it gazed at her with an expression of disdain, of something far darker than she had ever seen. "What is this?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling. Her reflection tilted its head slightly. "You know what this is, Lyra. This is your failure, the failure you fear the most." A lump formed in Lyra's throat as she stared at the other her. The words were haunting, cutting deeper than anything physical ever could. "No," she whispered, stepping backward. I don't fear failure. I don't." Her reflection smirked, and the room seemed to grow colder. "Oh, but you do. You have always feared it. It's why you came here, isn't it? To prove that you are worthy of the knowledge, of the recognition. But deep down, you know you will never be enough. You will never be what they want you to be. You will always fall short." Lyra's pulse quickened, her stomach turning as the weight of those words settled over her. She clenched her fists, trying to hold herself together. "You're wrong," she said through gritted teeth, but the voice of her reflection only grew louder. "You've always been afraid of not being good enough, of not being able to live up to your potential, and here you are, trying to unlock secrets that you can't even comprehend. You're not ready. You'll never be ready." Lyra's vision blurred with unshed tears. It was true, wasn't it? She had spent so much of her life pushing herself, sacrificing relationships, sanity, and even her own well-being, all to prove that she was worthy of something, anything. But here, in this moment, in the heart of Valmore, those insecurities that had followed her all her life came rushing back. She fell to her knees, her breath ragged as the weight of her fear bore down on her. Her reflection stepped forward, standing over her with an almost pitying look in its eyes. "See? You can't even face your own doubts. How could you possibly understand the knowledge you seek? You're not worthy." Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, trying to shut out the voice, but the reflection's words only grew louder, louder, until they became a deafening roar in her mind. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" the voice sneered, its tone mocking, a cruel, unrelenting taunt. But in the midst of the storm, something inside Lyra shifted. She wasn't just the scientist from Earth anymore, she was more. She had faced her fears every day, whether in the lab, in the isolation of space, or in the quiet moments of self-doubt. But this was different. This wasn't just failure. This was her fight for understanding. She opened her eyes, standing tall despite the storm of emotions inside her. She looked at the reflection, the cruel mockery, and realized something crucial. "I'm not afraid of failing," she said, her voice steady, her resolve firm. "Failure is a part of learning. It's part of growing. But I won't let it stop me. I'm here to learn, and I'll face whatever comes to me in order to do that." The reflection faltered, a flicker of uncertainty in its gaze. And in that moment the room seemed to fade, the darkness lifting, and the echoes of the trial began to fade into silence. To be continued. The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra blinked rapidly, trying to steady herself, her heart still racing in her chest. The cruel voice, the one that had spoken to her in her deepest fears, had gone quiet. For a moment she wasn't sure if the trial was over, or if the room was simply toying with her. She had faced her reflection, her deepest insecurity, and in doing so had confronted the very thing she feared most, the belief that she was unworthy of the knowledge she sought. But that belief had faded. She had stood tall and faced it, and now the dark mirror of her own doubts no longer had power over her. The room around her seemed to breathe, the air thick with energy, as if the trial itself was watching, waiting for her next move. Slowly, cautiously, she stood from where she had fallen to her knees, her limbs trembling slightly. She ran a hand through her disheveled hair, taking in the strange alien architecture that surrounded her once more. The symbols on the walls glowed softly, pulsing with a rhythmic beat that seemed to correspond with the thudding of her own heart. The echo of her own voice from the trial still resonated in her mind. "I'm not afraid of failing." She repeated it to herself silently, grounding herself in the mantra. "I won't let it stop me." A sudden gust of wind whipped through the chamber, and Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She looked up in surprise. The air shimmered around her, distorting like heat waves on a summer day. As the distortion cleared, the figure appeared again, its glowing eyes bright in the dim light of the chamber, its elongated form taller than any human. "Have you learned what you needed to, human?" the figure's voice echoed, its tone both soft and grave. Lyra took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I have," she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still surging through her veins. "I understand now. I understand that I don't need to be perfect. I just need to keep going." The figure regarded her with a silent intensity, as though weighing her words. For a long moment nothing stirred, and the quiet of the chamber stretched between them like a living thing. Then, without a word, the figure extended its arm toward the far side of the room, where the massive stone slab still hovered. It began to move once more, the symbols shifting on its surface, coalescing into new patterns. Lyra's heart leapt in her chest as the stone slab rotated, revealing a hidden passage in the wall. She had known it would come to this. Some deeper level of understanding would open to her, but now, standing at the threshold of what was next, she felt the weight of the moment settle into her bones. "You have passed the trial," the figure intoned, its voice solemn. "You may proceed." Lyra swallowed, glancing one last time at the figure. It had been silent throughout the trial, but its presence had been constant, like the watchful eye of a god observing the mortal realm. The sense of power it exuded was undeniable, and now, with the trial behind her, she was being granted access to the heart of Valmore, to the very thing she had sought for years. She nodded once, turning toward the newly revealed passage. It was narrow, winding, and filled with a faint mist that hung in the air like smoke. As Lyra moved toward it, she couldn't help but feel a mix of trepidation and excitement. She was no longer just a scientist on an archaeological mission. She was now part of something far bigger. Something ancient and vast, a part of the unknown that stretched beyond her comprehension. The passage spiraled downward, deeper into the earth. The mist grew thicker, obscuring her vision as she moved forward, her boots crunching softly on the stone beneath her. She kept her hand on the cool wall to steady herself, the air growing colder with each step. As she descended, the sounds of her breathing became louder in her ears, echoing in the tunnel. The stillness of the planet outside, the weight of the desert sands above, felt distant now, like they belonged to another world. The deeper she went, the more the air seemed to change. It was as if she were leaving one reality behind and stepping into another. And then, suddenly, the mist cleared. Lyra stepped into an enormous chamber, and her breath caught in her throat at the sight before her. The room was vast, an underground cavern so large that she could not see the far walls. Jagged stalactites hung from the ceiling, their tips brushing against the dense fog that floated like a blanket across the floor. The floor itself was smooth and metallic, a strange alloy she had never encountered before. It gleamed beneath the faint light, reflecting the shimmer of distant, almost imperceptible structures that rose from the ground like ancient spires. At the center of the chamber stood a massive obelisk, towering and covered in the same alien symbols she had seen throughout the city. This time, however, the symbols seemed to pulse with life, glowing brighter as she approached. The obelisk hummed, a deep resonating sound that filled the air with a heavy vibrational force. Lyra's mind swirled with questions as she stepped closer. "What is this?" she whispered, almost afraid to break the reverence of the place. The air around her grew thick, as if responding to her words. The symbols on the obelisk shifted, rearranging themselves in complex patterns. Lyra stood frozen, mesmerized, as they danced across the surface of the structure, twisting and turning, forming shapes she couldn't quite understand. It was as though the obelisk itself was alive, communicating with her in a language beyond comprehension. Then, as if on cue, a voice filled the chamber. It was not spoken aloud, but instead reverberated through her mind, as though the very stone and air around her were speaking directly to her consciousness. "Welcome, Seeker." Lyra's pulse quickened, her hands trembling as the voice echoed in her head. The voice was ancient, far older than anything she had ever encountered. There was an undeniable sense of power in its tone, a weight that felt immeasurable. "You have passed the trial. You have proven your worth. But know this. This knowledge comes with a price." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. A price? She had prepared herself for many things on this journey, but this was something she had not anticipated. "The knowledge you seek cannot be given without consequence. The secret of Valmore was never meant for those of your kind. It will change you, and change the world in ways you cannot yet fathom. Once the door is open, there will be no turning back." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood still, determined not to show fear. "What price?" she asked aloud, her voice barely a whisper in the vast cavern. "The price is simple. You will be bound to the knowledge you seek. It will consume you, body and mind, until you are one with it. You will no longer be the person you were before. You will become something else." The weight of the words pressed down on Lyra, but she refused to let them paralyze her. The potential of the knowledge, the discovery she had long sought, was too great. She had come this far, and she would not turn back now. "I accept," she said, her voice firm despite the growing uncertainty in her chest. "I will bear whatever it takes." There was a long pause, the silence between the voice and Lyra stretching out like a chasm. Then, as if satisfied with her answer, the voice spoke once more. "So be it." In an instant, the symbols on the obelisk flared to life, glowing with a brilliant intensity that almost blinded her. The ground beneath her feet trembled as the obelisk began to shift, its surface splitting open like the petals of a long dormant flower. A beam of light shot out from the center of the obelisk, illuminating the cavern in a brilliant, blinding glow. Lyra's body stiffened as the light enveloped her, an overwhelming sense of energy flooding through her, filling her mind and body. She gasped as her vision blurred, the world around her distorting in impossible ways. For a brief moment, it felt as though the very fabric of reality was bending, warping as the ancient knowledge of Valmore flooded her consciousness. Flashes of alien worlds, civilizations long extinguished, technologies far beyond human understanding, surged through her mind. She saw the rise and fall of the Valmore people, an ancient race of beings who had once wielded unimaginable power. She felt their dreams, their triumphs, their deepest fears. She witnessed their tragic downfall, a collapse brought on by their own hubris, their attempt to control the very forces that governed the universe itself. And as the knowledge of Valmore seeped into her, Lyra understood. She understood the terrible truth behind their demise, and the power that they had sought to control. It was a power that she now held in her hands, for better or worse. As the light began to fade, Lyra sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the torrent of information. The cavern around her seemed to stabilize, the brilliant light dimming to a soft glow. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to comprehend what had just happened, what she had just unlocked. But the voice, the ancient presence that had guided her here, was no longer speaking. Lyra was alone now, alone with the knowledge of Valmore, and with the price she had paid for it. To be continued.